Hey, thank you so much for checking out Flip. Here's how to use it. Flip is a 9-channel sampler, sequencer, and performance tool that we created to make it as easy as possible to make music on the go, incorporating the sounds around you if you like. One thing I'll note right off the top is there's this question mark icon. If you press that, there's a blue border all around the app, and that lets you know you're in help mode. So anything that you tap will have a little descriptor on it, just so you can learn about stuff as you go if you want to do that. But in this tutorial, I'll show you just about everything. So turning off the help mode there, let's work our way down the pages. There's 8 different pages on the right side of the screen here. So we'll just go through them one by one. On the top, here's where your different projects are located, like your different tracks that you're working on. You just select them by tapping on them. I've got a blank one here that I'm using for doing this video demo. You can create a new project here. You can access the sample pack store here. Each of the packs also comes with a project made with those samples. And this button takes you to this video. On each track, you can rename it, duplicate it, share it like through AirDrop or email, or delete it. One page down, this is the samples page or the sample settings page. And this is probably the most complicated thing that you'll need to look at in the app, but it's actually really easy to use once you know where things are. Here are our 9 currently selected sounds. And right now we're looking at the sample tab. So here we can trim sounds. And we can also record a new sound to this pad. So I can just press this, hey, and that's right there. Hey. It also tries to intelligently detect the first transient that you've recorded, but you can, of course, just drag it back if you did want to use everything from your recording. Also, instead of holding to record, you can just tap, and then it'll keep recording until you tap again. And it'll keep recording until you tap again. Now you can start working with the sample, you can do whatever you want with it, it's already saved, but if you press the save button, you can name it, and it'll get saved with that name instead of that jumble of numbers that was like the date and time of the recording. There's also input gain here as you're recording, which I find I usually don't need to use much, but if you're recording something really loud or really quiet, you can adjust how much your mic is picking up. Recording until you tap again. Let's use that chunk for now and move over to the envelope tab. So this is a very standard amplitude envelope, and if you don't know what that means, this sets how the volume will respond as you trigger a sound. So right now it's gonna just play recording until you tap again. As long as I hold it, it's also going to have a little bit of a tail, so if I let go of the pad before the sound is over, it'll fade out. Recording until you tap again. But I can just knock that down to 0. Recording. And it stops immediately after I tap it. We could also soften the attack until you tap again. So that's like a fade in. And if you lower the decay, you can have a stronger accent at the start of the sound, which is quite a common thing to do. It mimics the way real sounds occur. You know, like if you hit a drum, right at the beginning is when it's the loudest. Let's look at the next tab, which is an EQ. You do have to turn it on down here. This is a 3-band EQ. You can activate the bands and see which ones are on by which of these buttons are lit up here. You can also choose what kind of curve you want. And these shape the frequency spectrum of the sound. Something I really like is that you can turn on this spectrum analyzer and actually see all the frequencies dancing as your sound plays, which can be helpful to find problem areas or see things that you'd want to accentuate. I'm happy with my sound there. Let's go to the effects tab. This is a really fun spot. So there's 4 different effects that each channel can have. With Bit Crush, you can reduce the sample rate and the bit depth. And there's also a dry wet control for that. Next is a chorus effect. So it doubles up your sound and pitch modulates it a little bit. The filter is a combination low and high pass filter. So 12 o'clock means no effect, and then going counterclockwise is low pass. And going clockwise is high pass. And you've got resonance here too. Resonance accentuates the frequencies at the cutoff point. And then there is a delay. Sync is on, meaning these will be time-synced delays. They'll fit with the tempo of our song. But if you turn that off, you can have delays at any millisecond setting, up to 500. With link off, we can have independent delay times for the left and right channels. And with ping pong, the left and right channels feed back into each other, so it's a slightly more complex delay rhythm. You've got dry wet as you do with all of the effects, and then feedback increases the amount of delay tails. It's also possible to drag and reorder the effects, so that can sound different sometimes. Like for instance, if the delay is before the filter, then I can filter the delayed sound. Whereas if I put the filter before the delay, any filter moves that I do are then delayed. Now before I go to the Browse tab, I'll just show you some controls that are visible no matter which of the other tabs here you're on. Solo means that only this track will be audible, so it's handy if you're working on something while you have playback going, you can just quickly only hear the one track that you're selected on. Reverse, of course, reverses the playback of the sample. I'll turn off the effects so you can hear this. Polyphony lets you choose whether multiple instances of the sample can play at the same time. Switching that to mono means that a new instance of this sound playing will cut off any previously playing instance of that sample. So just to quickly demonstrate that, here's a synth sound. I can play several notes at once with this, but if I switch that to mono, any note that I play will cut off previous instances of it, even if they're still being held down. Let's go back to the sample settings page. These two knobs here are super easy to understand. Pitch. You can go 2 octaves down or 2 octaves up. Double tap to reset it. And then there's also gain for the sample. Double tap to set that at 0. Now let's go check out the browser. There's a few samples here. Stuff that you record gets saved in the root folder. Here's our record sample that we did earlier. Up at the top, there are subfolders you can organize things into. These also show up whenever you buy a sample pack from the store. Here's a quick button to access the sample pack store as well. Now if I go into any of these folders, I can start auditioning samples. Let's say I like this rim shot. I can either drag it to the pad that I want to put it on, or whichever pad I have selected, I can press load and it'll go to that pad. If you have a sample selected and you press favorite, it just puts a heart beside it so you can have a quick visual on the sounds that you like the most. Press it again to unfavorite it. You can rename or delete samples, and then import lets you bring in samples from the Files app. So you can bring audio files to your device and load them that way, but you can also just airdrop audio files to your device while Flip is open and it'll automatically import them. One last thing about this page, the dice icon will randomize your sample selection. Kind of a fun thing to have if you're just starting your track, you want some quick inspiration. So that's the samples page. Let's move on to the pads page. This is just a big version of what you saw in the top right here, so it's easier to perform with. On this page, you can also randomize samples. Additionally, on this page, if you hold down the dice button for a couple seconds, it will randomize all the samples. Gonna grab a couple sounds I actually want to use, and let me show you recording. So I'm gonna press the record button and then play, and there's gonna be a 1-bar count in. And you can hear the stuff I just recorded is already playing back, and it's also been quantized, and that's because I have a setting where quantized recording is on. You can turn that off here if you want to keep all your human feel, but I generally like to have it. Depends what kind of music you're working on. So now let's go to the piano roll, and here you can see what I've recorded. Those are my hi-hats, and those are my claps. So that's how you can record from multiple pads at the same time, but it's also handy sometimes if you want to play actual notes to go to the piano roll tab and then hit this sub tab for keys. Actually, let's choose what channel we want first. I think I have a nice 808 down on channel 7. And here's where I can input live note data. Turning off the keys tab, I can see those notes in the piano roll. This is a full-on piano roll. We've got 10 octaves here. You can navigate and zoom both horizontally and vertically. And there's also a loop brace here that you can move around or resize to up to 4 bars. That is one thing that we might extend later. We're just trying to keep this somewhat contained and easy to use, but let us know what you think about the maximum loop time. I should also note this resizing resolution changes depending on your zoom. So right now you can see it's snapping to bars. If I zoom in a little bit, we can resize it to basically where the grid lines are. So if we go way in, you can actually resize this by 30-second notes. So why don't we make this a 2-bar loop? I'll just go out to 2 bars and record some new notes in our second bar. By the way, this note that's highlighted is the original pitch of the sample, and Flip does try to detect the original pitch of your sample. It might not always get it right because sounds are complicated and not every sample is just one single perfect note, but it'll do its best to place that sample on the keyboard at the key that it's supposed to be. A couple other things about the keyboard: you can change octaves by pressing here, up or down. And one thing that we thought could be kind of interesting is you can actually change the octaves independently for the top and bottom keyboard if you happen to be playing a part where you want higher notes and lower notes. Just trying to make it as flexible as possible given that you are putting a piano on an iPad. Lastly, for this page, turning velocity on means that notes will play with higher velocity as you get lower down on the note. Speaking of velocity, here's a tab where you can adjust velocities. Clearly for this part, I don't want to have different velocities. Let's exit the velocity view. I want to show you a little bit more in depth about the piano roll. Firstly, you can addition notes by tapping on the piano keys on the side there. There's also that little dot that indicates the original pitch for the sample. And now let's look at editing notes. Notes will change color if they're currently playing, but also notice that each note already has kind of 2 different colors. There's a lighter side and a darker side. Dragging on the lighter side, you can move a note, and dragging on the darker side, you can resize a note. Bear in mind, both those operations will be quantized or not, depending on this little Q up here. If that's not lit, then you're not quantized, and you can move a note to any little spot. You can also resize it to any amount, not just the grid resolution. Now let's also talk about this pop-up menu. So this happens whenever you have a note selected, and you can also select multiple notes by dragging over them, and then they're highlighted. Trash can deletes them. I'm gonna undo that. You can also quantize a note by pressing the Q. So there it goes, snapping to the nearest beat. Now duplicate will double the loop brace. So again, it has a maximum of 4, so you have to be at 2 bars or less for duplicate to work. And it'll basically place the notes you have selected in the exact same positions in the duplicate bar. So let's say we were back to a 2-bar loop there, and I wanted to just double the whole thing, select them all, press duplicate, and there you've got a whole other loop, and maybe you want to just vary the second repeat of it. The C here stands for copy. Let me show you copy. So if I want to copy this whole phrase, I'll select it all and press C. Then I get a little notification, long tap to paste. And we thought it would be interesting if you could paste anywhere pitch-wise. So wherever I tap, that tells the sequencer where to put the highest note in the copied phrase. So if I did want to copy this phrase exactly, I would select them all, press copy, have quantize on, and then long tap at the highest note position in the next place where I wanted that phrase to be. Last thing to show you in our selection menu is the dice, and this will randomize the timings of the notes. Not the pitches, because that could get chaotic really quick, but it'll just shuffle where notes are positioned. So it's an interesting way to get variations, and again, here you're only hearing one note at a time because this channel is set to monophonic. Now let's look at the Automate tab. This tab really excites me. Here across the top, you've got pages for all the automatable parameters. And by the way, this S, which is available on all these tabs, this is just another solo button, handy for when you're working on your editing. But let's go back to Automate and let me show you all the automatable parameters. So you've got the volume for the channel, the pitch for the sample, reverse on or off, and the sample start point. That's under this little sound sample tab. On the envelope tab, you've got attack, decay, and release. Then there's the 4 effects, the bit crusher and all its parameters, the chorus and all its parameters, the delay and all its parameters, and the filter and all its parameters. So let's use the bit crusher for our demonstration, since that will be very audible. First, got to make sure the effect is on. That's the same as going to the effects tab on that sample channel and turning it on here. We can very clearly hear that bit crush effect, so let's automate the dry wet. I'm gonna have it fade in over the course of a bar. And notice, I've got a 2-bar pattern, but my automation is only 1 bar long. If I want, of course, I can make that a 2-bar long automation. But they're not locked together like that. So that's something to pay attention to, but it also opens up so much power because, for instance, let's say I wanted to have this kind of sound happen just on every beat. Now I just need to draw it once and move the loop brace to 1 beat long rather than drawing it for the entire length of the loop. It's also really fun to have different length automations interacting. So let's say we've got this 1 beat bit crush automation. Let's do a 3 beat filter automation. So I have a lot of fun with this stuff. You know, you can have a different length automation for every parameter. Each of your channel's sequences can be a different length. Like we made the 808 4 bars, but our hi-hat and claps are still 1 bar. So a lot of flexibility there. Let's go back to the automate tab because there's a couple more things that I do want to show you. Go back to channel 7, looking at our filter frequency. You can also have quantized automations. So that filter is now changing perfectly on 16th notes. We can also randomize automations. And that can also be done in a non-quantized way as well. And I don't know if you noticed here, but there's a couple little quirks that you can actually use to your advantage. So notice when I turn quantize on, it keeps the same unquantized data so that you can undo it if you want. But if I have some quantized stuff, turning off quantize will give me these perfectly linear movements between each of the breakpoints. To delete all the automation, you can either double tap on the knob, or you can long tap in the window. And one other handy trick is if you have quantize on and you long tap and drag on the first beat of a loop, then you can set a value for the entire loop. By the way, it's also possible to record automation using the knobs. Automation will continue to be overwritten while record is on and while you're making contact with the knob. And that can also be done on the knobs in the sample settings page. Let's jump over to our next page, the mixer. This is super straightforward. You can just set the volume of each of your tracks. You can also pan them. Double tapping pan resets it to center. There's a reverb send. And you've got solo and mute. Now let's move on to the master page. So this is where you can edit the master reverb that all these sends go to. Let me just send that 808 there again so you can hear some of the effect. Room size. Filter out the highs or the lows. You can have a long decay, as well as a pre-delay. So that's like a slight delay before the reverb tail hits. Then you got 2 compressors, a maximizer and a limiter. pretty intuitive to use, just getting a little bit of polish onto your tracks, but definitely use them subtly because you can fully overdrive stuff. And we've also got an equalizer on the master that works just the same as the one I showed you that's on all the individual channels. Let's turn these off for now and go to the arrangement page. This is where you can make new patterns and structure them into a song. So if I tap on a pattern, it will play it as well as select it. And it will switch patterns quantized to 1 bar. Now, if I want to select a pattern without playing it, I can long tap on it. And you can see that this white outline is around the 2nd slot, but the blue highlighted pattern is the one that's still playing. So now if I go over to our piano roll, we can see that all these tracks, even though they're still playing, are actually empty because I am editing the 2nd pattern, which is blank right now. So I can either create a new pattern like that, or if I want to just copy this pattern, I can drag it over to one of the other slots, and now I have everything that was in the first pattern that I can edit to create a variation. One thing to note is that on the samples and mixer and master page, those settings are global. They're the same across the whole project unless you have automated any of the automatable parameters. Those are saved with each pattern. So let's make our 2nd pattern different. I am going to go to the hi-hat track and add more hi-hats. So now for the purposes of our demo, it's easy to tell the difference between the first pattern and the 2nd pattern. Now if I want to put these into an order in a song, I just drag them to the right side of the screen. Now if I press anywhere in the order, it'll start playing through them. If it gets to the end, it'll go back to the beginning. And here it's just going to go back and forth between pattern 2 and 1. And if I want, I can rearrange any of those by dragging them around. I can also insert new ones from the other side in the middle if I want, or of course I can add them to the end. And you can make the order as long as you want. There's no limit. If you want to remove something from the order, just drag it to the trash can. And if you drag a pattern from the left side of the screen over to the trash can, which I'm not going to do right now, it'll just delete it. It'll be like it's one of these blank patterns. The export button will render an audio file of your entire order. So if I pressed export right now, I would get an audio file that was pattern 2 3 times and then pattern 1. But also when you press export, you have the option to choose stems. And if you choose that, you get the master wave file of your song, and in addition, all the individual 9 channels. So really handy if you want to bring this into another program to do more work on it. I'm going to cancel that for now. There is another way to export audio from Flip, and that's using the tape icon, which is the live recording feature. If you press this, it'll start playing and start recording whatever you do. So you can change parameters, you know, mess around with effects, you can solo and mute things, change the volume, whatever you want to do. And when you press the tape icon again or the stop button, it will stop on the next bar. And so that's a great way to export perfect loops of anything where you might want to have a live performance element. One last page on the right-hand side here. This is the performance page, and this might be my favorite thing about this app. So again, you have some patterns that you can choose to play on the right, although if you are playing through the order on the arrangement page, it'll keep playing in that order. However, they are here if you want to trigger them manually. And then there's these 4 sliders that are a lot of fun: random, pitch, reverb, and filter. So let's look at the filter first. This is just a global filter. Going down is a low pass, in the middle there's no effect, and going up it's a high pass. And up here is just a resonance control. The next slider over is a reverb send. And that is the same as what's on the mixer page. It's activating these reverb sends on each channel. Although, if you press this pin icon, you can choose which channel the performance slider affects. So for instance, if we only wanted it to happen on the clap, which we have on channel 6, we can do that. Also in this little pin icon assignment menu, you can choose the maximum amount of reverb send with this slider. Next, we have a pitch bend slider. And again, you can assign which channel that is active on, and you can go up to 24 semitones, 2 octaves, up or down. The last slider is random, and basically it looks at what notes are in your sequence, and as you slide it higher, there is a higher chance that more of those notes will be added in 16th note slots where they aren't already. So let's turn this one on just for the bass. Actually, let's do the bass and the clap. And as I slide this up, you'll hear there are more bass notes and more claps. But also, there won't be any sounds at pitches that they aren't already in your sequence. So you won't hear any bass notes that we're not already using. Now for this song, it probably doesn't actually make sense to have it on the bass, but if I have it on the hi-hat and the clap, it'll be kind of like a cool little drum fill maker. And with the slider all the way at maximum, it's no longer random. It means that every 16th note will be filled. And last thing about the performance page, there are these lock icons under each of the sliders, and that just affects their behavior. So with the lock off, they always snap back to their default value, which is pretty handy for performance. But if you want, you can turn the lock on and then they will just stay wherever you leave them. All right, last few things about the app are up here. We've got an undo and a redo on most functions. This is something we really wanted because a lot of music making apps just don't have undo and redo. So that's there. Now let's go to this gear icon. This is the options or settings page. It has the metronome up at the top, so you can tap tempo here. You can also adjust incrementally with the plus and minus buttons, or you can just drag on the number to set your tempo. The metronome can be turned on or off here, and there is a volume for it. And then you've got swing here, which adds an adjustable amount of delay to every other 16th note, creating kind of a humanized feel. And then we got a few options here. So there's Ableton Link integration. And if you don't know what Ableton Link is, basically a lot of different devices and apps can have Ableton Link. And if they're sharing the same Wi-Fi network and Ableton Link is on, then they'll all play back in perfect sync. It's a really fun tool for jamming. Play behavior, play from start position just means when you hit play, do you want it to start at the beginning of the pattern or do you want to pick up where it left off? And it kind of makes the play button more like play and pause rather than play and stop. MIDI recording, auto activate metronome. Pretty self-explanatory. If you're going to record some MIDI notes, do you want the metronome to automatically turn on? Audio recording, enable multi-channel recording refers to this tape icon, live recording. So if you want to have stems of your live recording in addition to the master output, you can do that. The next two things are kind of experimental. Enable pitch for pads and enable velocity for pads. And basically what that means is that the higher up you play on a pad, the louder it'll be. And going left will be lower in pitch while right will be higher in pitch. So just a fun little thing we put in there because we could. It could be an interesting way to create new sounds to work with if you live record while you're messing with them and then re-import those samples. But of course, if you want to play stuff with accurate pitch, you would want to do that on the keys page. And then the very last thing in settings is quantized recording. So if you have this on, then MIDI that you are recording will be quantized to 16th notes in the piano roll grid. So that is Flip. Just a reminder, there is this help menu. So if you activate that mode, then pretty much anything you tap on will tell you a little bit about itself. Also, don't forget about the store where we'll be regularly adding new sample packs and projects from a lot of different artists. I hope you have lots of fun making music with Flip. Please subscribe to this channel because we're going to keep posting more in-depth tutorials and different tips and tricks and stuff like that. And if you enjoy the app, please leave us a rating in the App Store. We'd really appreciate that. And if you have any issues with it, go to flipsampler.com. There's a contact page there, and we'd love to hear from you. We are really trying to make this the best app that it can be. We're committed to continuing to update it and improve it regularly. So your feedback is welcome. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy Flip.